So we talked downforce a little bit, we talked depth. So we have established a furrow. We've done a really good job of getting a single seed down into the furrow. And now it's just a matter of resetting soil density. Okay, so there's two things that we have to do with a closing system really, really well. That's annoying. Ideally, what we want to do is just reset it like that seed magically got back into the soil and nothing was ever there. And so we want to make sure that we can collapse that sidewall and encapsulate that seed with good seed to soil contact, with good available moisture and oxygen both, right? And so as we move through with whatever closing wheel you choose to, again, we're going to set that furrow, we're going to make sure that it is friable and that we can put our fingers down and it will collapse. And then we're also going to come back behind the closing wheel and see its work and make sure that we're leveled off, that we don't have gaps, that we don't have the wheel set too wide or too narrow, that we don't have air gaps underneath, or if we don't have closing up on the top. So what you see in these trials here, and I think we'll use Todd as our Vanna White. We did a super scientific study here yesterday because it rained and I was running out of ideas of what to do with closing when it rains. We have a 60-pound downforce over here, or downforce, which would be the air in this airbag on the back side. Okay, so this is the closing system that was on that planter, or like it. And so we've got a 60-pound, we've got a 40-pound, we've got a 20-pound. And so what I did is I stood in front of the signs at the 60 and I jumped up and down a bunch of times and compacted that dirt. I don't think it's 60 pounds per se, but I think it'll work for demonstration. Then we go to the 40 pounds and I just walked on that dirt like this a little bit, went a couple of times, made it a little firmer, and then we go to the 20 pounds further down the line here, and I just walked across it once. And so I've got heavy firming pressure, I've got a little bit of firming pressure here and a little less down at the 20s. So what Todd's going to try to do is simulate a corn plant with his shovel and see if he can get slabbing, or see what he gets when he digs in front of that sign just a little bit. See what kind of soil structure we've got. So obviously we planted yesterday into a little bit of excess moisture. It's going to be pretty hard for a seed to penetrate through that, especially as that dries off. It's going to crust a little bit, right? In the opposite side where you all are standing, the sun has come back in and dried a lot of that out. So all of this was obviously tilled up. There's not much moisture left inside of that soil, right? If you take your boots and you slide some of that out, there's going to be moisture down below. So how do I protect that moisture? Okay, that's going to be the second stage of closing. So go ahead and go to the 40 and let's see what the slabs come up with a little less downforce. Anybody in here have a case planter? Anybody know what they call a case planter? It's a dangerous question in a group of people that don't have case planters, but they call it an early riser planter, right? Why do they call it an early riser planter? Okay, so it's a two-part piece. They've got a reduced inner diameter gauge wheel that leaves a really, really soft furrow. Okay, so when they go to destroy that with their closing system, they're resetting that soil density with that packing wheel that they have on the back side, and they keep that whole furrow area really, really, really soft, and their crop truly does come out of the ground a little bit quicker than the rest of the other planters that are out there. That's all fine and dandy until the rest of the planters started to get the tech on them to where we can mitigate that hard furrow and we can mitigate the bad furrow closing that's on the back side of it. So he'll go down one more and let's try it in the 20-pound area.
I think their staggered disc gives them a little less sidewall compaction also.
It does. It actually doesn't open as far. So it's like an 11 degree versus a 14 degree or something like that. So they have less soil disturbance in the first place. Plus they've got the offset so it goes down into the ground a little bit easier. And so their whole structure where that seed lays is softer, always has been. And so that makes it easier for that seed to come out. And so no different than Todd running the shovel here for us. That ground down there where I just simply lightly reset soil density on top of this tilled ground, it's still friable. That seed can pop right back up. There's still moisture available. As we went too heavy on the closing on here, it's going to get harder and harder for that seed to come up. So one of you had asked the question, what do I do in my terraces? What do I do in the different soils? This is again where we come back with sensing and say, let's start to read what that closing system is telling us and understand, am I keeping consistent closing in there and consistent destruction of the sidewall? And so FurrowForce is what they used in here. And so it's got a load sensor attached on the end of this wire. And what that load sensor is telling me is there any weight back here on this packing wheel? Okay, do the stitch wheels in the back carry any weight? And if they don't, what that means is these front stage wheels are starting to come up out of the profile. Okay, I'm setting the depth on those wheels here in the center by turning that rotary screw, and that'll raise or lower that first stage to where I want for my closing capabilities on that. I want to be about a half an inch above, quarter to a half an inch above seating depth. So there's some rings that are on the side of this. That's going to be your half inch and your 2 inch ring that's on there, and so you can see as we're planting where that is sitting in the soil profile. The deeper I go, the more I'm going to need extra force to keep that system pushed down into the ground. And if I don't show any weight here, we just start adding weight into the bag so I get consistent closing. That should help us as we go across those different soil types to make sure that we've got the consistency in there, because it's going to fall in on sand and it's going to try to push out on the heavier clays, and I've got cleaning capacity that lives inside of that, or closing capacity that's in there. So if you look at the downforce maps, and I think we'll get some books out afterwards as we get all the maps off the 2020, as you start looking how this impacts downforce, if I push harder on a closing wheel, does that make it lighter on the row unit or heavier on the row unit's gauge wheels? Lighter, right? The harder I push here, it starts lifting that row unit out of the ground. So what do I do if I've got airbags or springs? I got to increase the air, I got to pull down the down springs, right? And I've got to add more pressure. The hydraulic system is going to take care of that automatically. The auto airbags that are out there in the market, they'll do that as well. But as I change row cleaners, which will be the next part that we go down to, as I push more with row cleaners, that lifts on the row unit, and that's going to negatively impact my downforce management. As I push harder with the closing wheels, that's going to lift on the row unit, that's going to negatively impact downforce. The opposite is also true. As I lift a row cleaner that you'll see over here, all of a sudden that row unit's 50, 60, 70 pounds heavier, and now I'm compacting again. Same thing on this, take the weight away, I'm carrying more weight. As all of these changes occur, this is why we continue to come back to auto downforce systems helping you manage through that. Can you do that with a spring and an airbag? Absolutely, if you have a good operator in the cab. I know some guys that can run a factory stock planter as good as any system that we've got out there for a little while. But as the days go on and as you get tired through the end of the day and the rest of the world happens, it's hard to maintain those planters, and that's where the automation comes in with some of the sensors and the control modules. Okay, so you can change the stagger on these wheels forward and back. You can go in and out with them, and then we can change depth up and down, as well as the air pressure that's in there. So there's a ton of adjustability inside of these to allow you to fit the different soil profiles and moisture challenges that you may have. We do offer 3 different wheel styles on there on the front setup here on the first stage. There's a smooth one, there is this one which covers most of the acres, and then there's a different kind of dimpled design that's out there as well. You may want to try a couple different ones to see what fits your area best. These most likely will cover it. Questions on closing wheels? Anybody try FurrowForce yet? I only have one disclaimer on these things. They're a nightmare to dig seed behind because you can't find them. You can't find a furrow, you can't find the seed. You swear you're planting because you know you've run the seed tender once that day, but it is impossible to find seed behind there. I'm really bad at digging seed in the first place, but as you try to do it behind here, you just dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, and you finally find one, and then you can start setting your distances with your fingers, and then it's a whole lot easier to find them. But it really does a nice job of resetting soil density and then packing that moisture line back down with the closing wheels to where we're not leaving all that air to where we start wicking moisture out of there. So it's a nice little balance of control and adjustability to where you're not constantly changing all these different wheels out. Let's move down to residue management. Did you have more to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, on the 60 pounds of force down here, we had quite a wide variety of when those plants first popped up out of the ground. We had some, I won't go into a whole bunch of numbers, but some started popping up at 12. The vast majority of them were then there from the 24 to the 72 hour mark, but then we did have some to go up into the 84 and 96 hours after that first seed popped up out of the ground. You go to the 40, it's a little bit more consistent. We didn't have any come up within the first 12, but they're within the 24 to 60 hours. That was your biggest, and so that's 2 days. That's pretty good. And then you go down to where it's 20. It started earlier because there's less compaction, so we did have some start coming up within the first 12 hours, but then same thing, it kind of tapered off there around that 60 hour mark again. So there is a point where too much force is too much. but it's one of those things where, you know, it's just finding the right pressure for your field at that particular moment in time.
A lot of that'll be picked up on that load sensor on there. If you don't have that load sensor and you don't have that style closing wheel, again, your best friend is to get out and dig. Spend a little bit of time behind that planter digging and understand, am I destructing the sidewall? Am I moving seed placement? Am I resetting soil density or leaving a bunch of air in there to where that soil profile is going to dry out early on us or anything like that? Or am I over compacting it and the thing's going to crust over on me and I'm going to struggle with the emergence? That's what all that data is telling us at this point. Any questions on closing? Really all I would do is add another tank. I'm cheap and frugal like that, so I just go to TSC and T1 in parallel, so I've got more volume. I don't need more pressure. It probably depends more on whether I'm going to run auto or manual. If I'm going to run auto, we're moving a lot of air a little bit at a time, but it doesn't take a lot of extra air capacity to do it. What's that?
Yeah, I will say when we were planting this, that air compressor was getting quite warm up there. Get the bigger one.
That's the big one.
I'm not sure what. I don't think it is. But just spend that money up front. You'll thank yourself later there, because that air compressor was getting a little warm up there.
Yeah, so there's a recommendation chart of size of planter and which style you've got and which combination of air needs that you have, and it'll tell you which one to go to. A lot of times just adding volume will take the duty cycle of that compressor down a little bit and help you. All right, let's move to closing row cleaners. Moist in here. All right, so we went fixed. Where's our line at? Right back here. Okay. All right, so all we did in this trial is, I keep saying we, I had nothing to do with this. This is all your guys' work. So you guys have done a great job of putting a really good plot together. So how do we manage a row cleaner? There's a lot of different styles that are out there, but the whole intent is how do we get consistent temperature into that furrow? Okay, I'm up quite a bit further north, and so we deal with snow quite a bit, and it can be 15, 20 below zero. And as we scoop sidewalks and driveways out, we get enough radiant heat that it dries the concrete off, even though we're well below freezing, right? The same thing occurs inside of a strip when we're planting. If I leave residue in this no-till in the furrow, and sometimes it's cleaning and sometimes it's not, I will have a temperature differential going right down that same row. And so I'm trying to get uniform consistency on getting the residue out of the way, keep that temperature consistent, and taking all the disease pressure as well as that water wicking capacity of the trash out of the furrow. So I've got uniform furrow, I've got no depth impact on there, I've got no disease pressure, I've got no residue sitting right next to a seed trying to wick that moisture away. And so this trial has no row cleaners, so they're pinned all the way in the air. So I'm carrying an extra 60 pounds of weight on that row unit. You can see going through here, he'll cover the details in just a second. And then over on this side, they pinned them in the down position, okay? Much like a fixed row cleaner that's set too deep. You'll see the trenching that occurs back behind here. I mean, we're months removed from planting and you still see some pretty heavy ridges. There's a lot of risk associated with that. If you get some heavy rains or if that's going on a downhill, you'll tend to get some washing that goes through that. So ideally what we would do is just set a tine depth on our row cleaners that can follow the contour of the ground, but yet make sure that we're moving the residue away without moving much for dirt. Okay, so we came out with a new row cleaner here at the beginning of the summer called Reveal, and it's kind of a unique setup, and I'll do my best to explain it because I don't have one that's here, but we've got tines that are up in the front with a gauge wheel back behind it tucked into the V. And that gauge wheel is going to follow the contour of the ground on clean dirt. Okay, with the row cleaners that are on that system that are out there, you've got the depth bands that are on the front side of the tines. Well, those depth bands are going to follow the contour of the ground as well, but they're going to stay on top of residue. So as the residue gets thicker, your tine depth in the structure gets shallower. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set our tine depth on how deep do I want to move it into the soil profile, and then let that gauge wheel follow back behind there in a cleaned area to follow that off. We've also moved it off of the row unit onto the bar so that we get all of that vibration and all that weight management off of the row and just put it back on the bar. So we've got no bouncing going across, no chattering. We're not messing with the downforce settings because it's completely eliminated off of the row unit. What do we have for details? Where did Derek go? There you go.
For no row cleaners, one plant within the first 12, nothing until the 36-hour mark, where we had 3, 48, 6, and then, you know, between 3 to 5 plants for the next 60 to 96 hours. And after that, we had 8 plants that came up after 120 hours. Whether that be they couldn't get up out of the ground because we did have a little bit of a rain, or then they crested, or what the deal was. You go to the opposite side of that, where we had them fixed. We had a little bit better response because there was no trash there, so all that trash was out of the way, and it put a nice clean path for us to go behind and plant. We had 14 plants come up within the first 12, 6 within 24, 4 plants at 36, 4 plants at 48, and then 1 at 60. We did have some plants there at the 120 and no flag as well, and that probably is due to a little bit of compaction of the soil there, where we were putting too much pressure down before the planter came through and planted it. So
as we look at this as a whole system, we want to move the residue and get a nice clean flat furrow. Okay, we want to come behind that with a downforce system that hits the mechanical depth that you're looking for, carries enough weight to hold the sidewall integrity. We've got a meter that can drop one single seed every single time, regardless of what size or shape or speed or humidity or whatever you have to deal with. And then we want to reset that soil density by collapsing that furrow with your closing system. None of that has to be ours to be successful. Okay, let's be clear about that. There's some people think that it's a Kool-Aid statement, that it has to be precision or it won't work, right? You can get corn to come out of the ground without us, but it all works in conjunction as a system. As you push down on a row cleaner, you have to help the downforce system. As you lift the row cleaner, that downforce system needs to come back and take some weight away from it a little bit. Same thing happens on the closing system. As those soil profiles change, we want to be able to have the capacity to cut that sidewall back down and reset soil density, maintain our moisture, and put that seed to soil contact right where it needs to be. It's all about germination. Frankly, the meters really don't matter if I'm sending doubles and skips and I'm not getting consistent germination. The bigger fail on the yield side is going to be on the germination front. So my challenge to the group would be, before you go harvest, go pull your 100 plants. Go to the best spot you think you have in the field, go to the worst spot you think you have in the field, and go start pulling 20 plants, 50 plants, 100 plants. I don't know, it took us a couple hours to do that yesterday, do those 3 runs with a couple guys. I would highly recommend, just if the ear profile on the stalk is all at the same height, you're doing really, really well on that front. Okay, but don't listen to the brochures, don't listen to me, listen to your crop out in the field. It'll tell you exactly what it needs. The answer in that variability of that ear height is largely emergence. Okay, and we want to look at the rows around and the consistency of the ear, and that's where we're going to find the opportunity. I've got to spend a fair amount of time with Randy Dowdy and David Hula over the last couple of years. The only difference between them and most of the rest of the population is tolerance of error. They don't have magic foo-foo juice. They don't have some unbelievable equipment that nobody else has. They just tolerate less errors. They're kind of fanatics about it, and they really get nitpicky when you get into some of those things. But that's what those big yield winners are doing, is they're really paying attention to fertility placement, and they're really paying attention to the emergence scores. They're not allowing 12 to 24 hours. They're more in the 8 to 12 hours is ideal for them. And so it's all about the fundamentals of emergence first. Then we'll worry about plant density on populations and variable rates and singulations and spacings. And then once we know what we've got for a stand, that's when we can really start to fine tune our nutrient placement and nutrient management. So let's work on emergence as much as we can. That comes back to a row cleaner, that comes back to downforce and depth placement, and that comes back to a closing capacity, and make sure that we're managing that. But I can't reemphasize enough, take a few moments and get out of the cab. We all have tight windows, I get that. At the end of the day, you always have a few more minutes that you could have got out of the cab, and you could have dug just a little bit more. If that's you following the person that's running your planter, you can certainly do that. If you're a one-man show, take a few minutes to get out and dig and make sure that that dirt work is where you want it. Okay. Questions on anything that's been covered in the plot so far?
What depth were these wells?
Do you know what depth we were
I
at?
think we just went back to the regular 2.5, if I remember correctly.
Did Jason show you guys how to check depth on a plant? How to cut the stalk? Okay, so this can be done at any point in time in the year. The further into the year that you get, it gets a little bit harder. But just take a shovel and go around that plant, dig it up, and then just take a hatchet and cut that thing in half and look at the tip of the crown. So follow the point at the bottom of the stalk, and then find what's left of the seedling that's there. You'll usually be able to find the shell of it and add 3/4 of an inch. That works on every continent in this world, every hybrid, it's all the same. It's tip of the crown to that seedling plus 3/4 of an inch. That's planting depth. And so if you start going across your field and you pull a few of those out and you start seeing some big variations, if you see variation in ear height, it's really, really easy to go dig those plants up, cut those in half, and understand, did I have variable depth? It's a little harder to determine why we had variable depth this time of year, but at least you've got the answer of, did I hit consistency? I mean, it's sweat equity. I know it's not fun to be in a cornfield right now, but the answers of what happened and why are out there if we're willing to go dig and look for them. If you're not comfortable doing that, feel free to reach out to any of us. The agronomists in the area, they know a lot of these things on why why ear set is where it's at and why root structure is the way it is and why some of this stuff happens. We're more than happy to help you on that, and that's not just equipment stuff, but